In this session, we're looking at the issue of boundaries and battles. You know, the other day, a friend of mine told me about her 4-year-old daughter's birthday party. She said it was all sweetness and light until suddenly her little girl in her brand new princess dress decided she just couldn't live without a piece of wrapping paper that a 3-year-old boy had suddenly taken a shine to. And she said suddenly it was as if World War III had broken out. Have you heard of the toddler's property laws? If I like it, it's mine. If it's in my hand, it's mine. If I can take it from you, it's mine. If I had it a little while ago, it's mine. If it's mine, it must never appear in any way at all to be yours. If we're building something, all the pieces are mine. If it looks like mine, it's mine. If I saw it first, it's mine. If you're playing with something and you put it down, it automatically becomes mine. If it's broken, it's yours. And if sometimes you feel weary fighting those battles, you're not on your own. It happens to every parent because children will naturally test our authority. They'll naturally try to cross those boundaries. Now, the boundaries are important. They help keep us all safe. They help teach our children what we believe are right and wrong. But they will be tested, and therefore there will be battles. And the possibility for battles is endless. There's the battle of cleaning the teeth and the battle of sorting out the hamster. There's the battle of the untidy bedroom and the battle of the homework. But there's a very good reason that children will test those boundaries. You see, sometimes they want to know how important those boundaries are to us. They will push us. They're actually looking for a reaction. And when that happens, it is vital that they're not disappointed. See, this is not just about discipline. You have to work out what discipline is right for your family. It's not even just about training. No, this is more about security. There is nothing more destined to breed insecurity in a child than for them to believe there are no boundaries, and even if there are, nobody cares if they cross them. You know, in a perfect world, the children in the toddler group would share their sweets and toys with each other. They wouldn't be rude to their teacher in school. As soon as they got in the back seat of a car at the beginning of a long journey, they'd say to their brother or sister, "Are you sure you've got enough room?" Or, "Mummy, please can we play that lovely quiz where we all get a point for spotting a red bus or a cow?" But this is the real world. And in the real world, you and I as parents have the unenviable task of setting a couple of rules, defending those rules with all our heart, but then trying to work out what we do when a child breaks those rules, when they cross that boundary. It's exhausting, sometimes it's heartbreaking, but it's absolutely vital.
Of course they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
The world is going crazy and the lines for rules are getting blurred. So I think, yeah, they need boundaries set.
If they don't have a strict schedule, then how will they learn what it's like later on?
They don't know anything about life, so they really need to be taught and, trained for life, really.
Because we are busy, we tend to give them material things, we spoil them a little bit, and we don't always give them the discipline that they need.
Children do need boundaries because, it could be dangerous, boundaries to stop them from doing bad and, going out and doing things that they shouldn't be doing.
If you've got children who will behave when you go out, even if they're little terrors when you're at home,
Yes,
you're not doing too badly.
Please. No, these are for later.
I would say I'm reasonably strict. As a parent, I set very clear guidelines, and one thing I try and do is be predictable. All my kids know the things that I don't like.
I am more like I choose my battles. They know they can get away with a little bit more with me, but once in a while, they get mommy's bad cop side. So I think probably I'm the less strict one.
My dad is more strict than my mum, but they're strict enough to like keep us under control and make sure we do the right things.
I would say I'm fairly strict. I've quite a short temper as well. So yeah, I think I'm quite strict. But she does get away with things.
I don't think we're that strict, actually. I think we're reasonably strict, but...
I think we're quite strict, and I think... Well, I think the children would say I'm stricter.
I think Dad's the strictest.
Yeah, probably Dad. Because he always wants to make sure that you know what he wants you to do. And if he has to tell you more than 3 times, he gets a bit angry and strict.
Oh, I think I'm really strict. I do. I know I'm quite strict. Much stricter than you.
That's
Mum.
got to be Mum.
Yeah.
I probably started out more strict. I wanted to just have everything in order and in control, and as time went on, I realised that half of the stuff I didn't want them to, I wanted them to do, actually wasn't that important, and I probably made lots of mountains out of molehills.
You're not strict.
I'm not strict at all.
Not like me. I'm probably the more strict out of the two of us, which should be the other way round, really.
I would think that I probably am stricter.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mum.
It depends who you compare yourself with.
Oh, that's true.
Depends which other parents you're looking at and you think, oh, okay, compared to them, I'm quite laid back, but compared to someone else, I'm actually really strict.
So issues that are really important to us, a funny one I think is deodorant, because they're really starting to smell. So I am really strict. Every morning now, they've got to, especially the boys, have you got your deodorant on?
At the moment, it's a bit of a case of choosing your battles, isn't it? In terms of, what really matters and what's okay to let go, and trying to be consistent with those two things. I guess because of his age at the moment, the things we're trying to stop him do are throwing food across the kitchen.
I am quite strict about bedtimes and, food and meals, and they can't just help themselves. And you're a bit more, let's get chips on the way home from gymnastics and come home at 10 o'clock at night.
9.
It was 10.
But I get in trouble for shouting, arguing, being rude with attitude. That's mine.
I think probably disobedience we would go with, and lying's a big one, isn't it? We tend to come down quite hard on lying.
Yeah, honesty, always telling the truth. If you say yes, make sure you do keep your word. It's important.
I think we're strict about safety. So if there's anything that's dangerous, then we'll be very strict and be clear, no. And I do my finger wag, which I don't know where that came from, but I just started it when Jacob arrived. No, and that's when it's very serious.
They're strict, like when we don't do our stuff properly, or when we don't listen to them and just like fighting with them, stuff like that.
Yeah, probably stricter times when we haven't done our homework and stuff.
Yes, they can get round us. Phoebe's probably a bit of a daddy's girl, so I do have a bit of a soft spot for her.
Alfie's dad and I communicate quite a lot. We discuss certain rules that I have set, and he basically abides by them, or if he doesn't agree with them, then we discuss them, and then we set boundaries that are the same in each house and rules that are the same in each house.
Sometimes when you tell him off, I then hear him downstairs go, "Mummy, Mummy," as if he thinks I'll do something differently.
Yes, children do try to play one off against the other parents. If they want to do something involving a computer, they'll come and ask me because I haven't got a clue who's been banned from what, and I'll probably say, either yes if I'm busy doing something or I haven't heard the question, or I just say, ask mummy, and they'll shake their heads and say, well, she'll just say no. And I say, well, what are you asking me for then? Because, you know, I will agree with what mummy says.
They've tried to play us off from each other.
They do try and do that all the
They
time.
do try, but it doesn't work.
Most things are allowed, but if you play one against the other, they're not allowed to get away with that, because we always have to be united in a position when it comes to being strict or with any particular rule.
Alfie knows when she's done something wrong because I turn into Monster Mummy.
And turn green.
And turn green.
When I raise my voice, then they know that you know, that things aren't right.
Sometimes our dad and mum, they get quite frustrated, so we get told off.
I do struggle with patience.
Yeah.
But
as do I.
I have a Paddington Bear stare.
Yeah.
And they know. They know. And they can, Crystal can copy it, right? She's very good at yeah, it's the eyes, the raised eyebrows, and they know that that's trouble.
Sometimes my dad will like have a go at me for no reason, but then later on in the day he'll like apologise and realise that he's wrong.
Yeah, I say so to my children. Usually for shouting. Just completely losing my temper and then yelling like some crazy man.
Like when they send us to our rooms upstairs and then they come up and say, sorry.
What for? What are they actually sorry for though?
Sorry for shouting at you.
You know, we're just trying to do our best as parents. We don't always get it right. And I think that's important that they see that you know, hopefully they'll learn from that you don't always have to get things right, but that when you do get it wrong, you kind of admit it and, you know, hopefully learn from it and move on.
I've got two children, a daughter of 12, nearly 13, and a son of 9. It's been a real challenge in some ways. I think often we very much try to have a united approach to discipline and back each other up, and try to set boundaries that the children understand. And as they get older, that's become more sophisticated. We've talked more and more about the reasons why we set boundaries. But my daughter particularly, my eldest child, she very much from a very young age has been someone, if we draw a line in the sand, she wants to just step over it and see what happens and see what the consequences are. If we're doing something like baking or something, and she really enjoys the idea of perhaps making a cake together, there'll be certain points in it where it's a critical point in the process and you say, no, don't dip your spoon in there and have a mouthful. So she'll just get a tiny little mouthful, or don't throw flour on the floor. So she'll get a tiny bit of flour and just drop it on the floor, just to see how we react. So sometimes, depending on my mood, I'll let her off, and other times, what we say goes, and she learns the consequences of that. But being inconsistent really creates problems, I think. Yeah. There have been one or two occasions where something that she's been looking forward to, we've had to say, if this doesn't improve, then that's at risk. And I think there have been a couple of occasions where we've had to follow through on that. And there have been times when we've said, if you do this, then this will happen. And really, we haven't had the heart to follow that through. And it's really easy to sort of make a threat without thinking it through, and then have to row back on that later. And that really can cause problems, I think.
We've been looking at the issue of boundaries and battles, and we're joined by Dr. Kunle Ayonrinde. Kunle, as we listened to that story earlier, did any of that resonate with you as a paediatrician?
Yes, it does indeed, Rob. I do see children not uncommonly who have presented with issues relating to boundaries, where the rules might be there, but the children have a tendency to cross the boundaries or to challenge the boundaries. Sometimes these are well managed by their parents, but at other times the parents seem helpless. They just don't know what to do.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I think boundaries are so important, aren't they, in our families? It's a matter of security for our children. And sometimes I think as parents, we think it's just about, you know, having happy families, making life easier for ourselves, having those rules in place. But actually, it's a much bigger thing that we're doing as we set boundaries. We're actually equipping our children to be able to have self-control, to be able to understand consequences. And that's a really important lesson.
It was fascinating listening to that little that story, wasn't it? The little girl was told not to put flour on the floor, and so she did it. I mean, what's going on there in a child's mind when they do that kind of thing?
It's a power play, and essentially that's what the child is trying to do, to test whether they can have the upper hand of the parents. And sometimes when the parents do make the concessions at that point, and the child is then the more powerful person in the household, it then becomes a matter of the parents then having to accept the child's rules as against the child living under the rules of the household.
They talked about presenting that united front. How important is that?
Well, I think it's ever so important. As the dictum goes, united we stand and divided we fall. And I think that it's one of those areas in which if you have consistency within the parent household, already half of the battle is won.
I sometimes think it's really worth looking behind the behaviour, the child's behaviour, and just working out if they're just being naughty, or maybe there's another reason. So it could be that they're hungry, it could be they're tired. I know in our home, the hour of between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening, we used to call it the happy hour, when everyone was hungry and tired, and there were often sort of scraps and arguments and that sort of thing. And actually, sometimes it's good just to acknowledge that at that time of day things just might be a little bit more scratchy at home, and that's different from a child deliberately deciding to step across a boundary.
Kunle, what are the basic principles with regard to boundaries?
There should be fairness. It's important for it to be fair, and in some cases for the older child it may be something that's been negotiated between the parent and the child. It should also be clearly communicated in such a way that everyone knows where they stand.
And I think this is a really hard area for most parents. It's difficult for us to know, where to set the boundaries, how to maintain them, how to keep them in place. And I think many of us fall between, one of two extremes. So firstly, there's the authoritarian parent, which is very strict, very controlling, loads of rules, no explanation ever of why these rules are in place. And the child then has just no room to manoeuvre, no freedom. But then on the other hand, you have the very permissive parent, anything goes, really relaxed, no boundaries, or even if they are, they don't care if those boundaries are crossed.
You've got situations where the young person needs the guidance, they need their support, and yet they also need to hopefully grow up to be confident people who aren't unduly subdued by their inability to negotiate or make decisions themselves. On the other hand, you don't want a child who grows up being confused, lacking in boundaries, challenging authority, and run into problems outside of the home at a very early stage in their lives.
And actually, it can be challenging in our families. If we're parenting with a partner, and if one of us is more naturally permissive and the other is more naturally authoritarian, it can be difficult because we're approaching this issue from two different ends of the spectrum. But it's so important that we talk about it and we present a united front to our children. They really spot straight away if we're not together, standing shoulder to shoulder on this area. And I think also if we're parenting on our own, really important, because that's so tough at the end of the day if we're tired and the children are playing up, but just to try and be consistent and to have friends around us that can support us and encourage us.
But Kathleen, the other style of parenting, there's the authoritarian and the permissive, is the assertive, and I think generally this is the most effective. And here essentially you set as few rules as possible, but you enforce them. Kunle, why is it so important to follow through on consequences?
Rob, it provides another layer of guidance to the children, and also it provides some clarity, some predictability, so that they understand exactly what they're getting into.
And sometimes following through on a consequence means that we have to take a bit of a hit in the popularity stakes. I remember one time when we had a child's party in our garden, and there were loads of children on the trampoline, and they were doing something that was really quite dangerous. And so I had asked them to stop. Someone did it again, and I said, if that happens again, then everybody needs to get off the trampoline. And sure enough, one of them did it again. And I knew that I had to maintain that boundary and get everyone off the trampoline. And I felt really rubbish, because I felt, I was unpopular, I'd spoilt the party. But actually it was really important for safety that that boundary was maintained.
And there are other times, I think, when we regret setting consequences, because we know in our hearts we haven't really thought it through. I can remember a mum telling me that she'd said to her 6-year-old, if you do that, then we won't go and see The Lion King. And he did it. She said the only problem was we had 6 tickets booked, we were on a coach, another family were coming with us, and we just had to go. She said, I just backed myself into a corner. I wish I'd not mentioned it at all.
I know so often I have acted because I've been stressed or mad with them or whatever, and I've set unrealistic consequences, crazy things that actually would have been so much better if I'd taken a moment just to sort of count to 10, take a deep breath, and have something that was a bit more realistic.
Yes, and there have also been times, Catherine, where my wife and I have felt in hindsight that we might have been a bit too strict or harsh in some circumstances. And sometimes we've let it run, and there are other times when we'd go back to our sons and discuss it.
I think that's a really good point about being flexible. And I think also maybe there are occasions when we really have got something wrong with our children. And it's really good if we are able then to say sorry to them, to model apology and forgiveness. And if we do that, then they'll learn how to say sorry, how to apologise in turn as they grow up.
Well, Connie, we've talked about lots of things, consequences, boundaries, discipline being important not only for the home, but getting our kids ready for life. But in it all, if you had to give one top tip to parents, what would that be?
Thank you, Rob. If you'd indulge me, I'll have 2 top tips. Firstly, to be consistent. And secondly, to say what you mean and to mean what you say.
Very good. We've talked about parenting styles and boundaries and battles, and we can't avoid the battles, but there are some strategies that may help us get through them. First of all, we have to choose our battles as parents. We can't fight every battle, and if we try to, 2 things will happen. First, our child will say, my mum and dad are always on my back, but worse still, they'll never know when something really matters to us. But of course, we have to fight some of those battles. The boundaries give a child a sense of security. And if you're parenting with a partner, make sure you present a united front on this issue. And next, just as we saw with the love languages, every child is unique, so in the area of discipline. What works with one child won't necessarily work with another. I remember when our daughter was small, if we sent her to a bedroom, that would take a month to get over that. But with my son, it didn't work at all. He'd say, great, is this the worst you can do? And then another great strategy is to catch them doing something right. You know, this is so important, especially with the testing child. So often, all the testing child hears from us are negative comments. Stop doing this. Why'd you do that? But the problem with that is this. When the ear never hears praise, the heart loses the will to try. And sometimes we have to search out things we can praise them for. Good job. Well done. I was proud of you when you did that. It's so effective to catch them doing something right. And then finally, remember this. Rules without relationship lead to rebellion. And it's why in Parent Talk we've talked so much about topping up that emotional tank, listening to our children, using the love languages. We're trying to build a strong relationship, a foundation on which the boundaries rest. And that's particularly important when they reach those teenage years. But you know, none of this is easy, which is why I love what one mum said. She said, when my kids are wild and unruly, I get a small, safe playpen. And when they calm down a bit, I climb out of it.